What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. We got a full house today. My name is Jeff Spiegl. I'm joined by Daniel Starkand as usual, and old friend Matt Moreno, editor of the site, is back to join us today as we preview the NLCS, Dodgers and Braves. We keep saying we didn't know if we would ever make it halfway through a season, let alone full through the season. And then would we get tripped up in a 3-game series with a small sample size? But here we are, the NLCS, kind of everything has gone according to plan. And so we got a fun show for you today as we preview the NLCS, as we talk about what we've seen so far, as well as what we might see in the days to come. And so just as a point of starting, why don't we just start with what we've seen? 5 playoff games. The Dodgers are 5-0. And just looking at what our observations are of the Dodgers, what stood out to us so far. And so for me, I'll start us off, and it's just the bullpen. I mean, like, the bullpen both has been good and also a mess. And specifically, I want to talk about the closer situation. Kenley Janssen, not great. I've been the guy, Daniel could vouch, like, I've defended Kenley Janssen probably far too much. I'm looking at exit velocity. I'm looking at this stuff, and he's just been a mess so far. And it all got confirmed in Game 2 when he actually had to be pulled, the first time that had ever happened in the playoffs with Janssen. And so now the question is, what do they do now? We've got lots of questions about Janssen. Is he the guy, etc. For me, I actually want to be optimistic about this, and I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts. I actually think this is an opportunity for the Dodgers to be a little bit chaotic in the sense of not let the Braves know exactly who's waiting at the end of the game. I think the Dodger bullpen is well positioned. I tweeted this out and got a little bit of a heat on it, but I said, do the Dodgers have the 4 or 5 best relievers they've ever had outside of Janssen, of course, and maybe Brandon Morrow? One person said Brian Wilson. I said, okay, Brian Wilson for one of those years was probably elite. But other than that, I mean, Mcgee, Trinan, Gratterall, even Victor Gonzalez, I think those guys are great. So I would just say I think the Dodgers have 4 or 5 really, really good options that they could throw at the back, depending on if you want a righty or a lefty or a strikeout guy or a ground ball guy. And so for me, my observation is I think the bullpen, as rough as Janssen looked, I actually like where our bullpen is at heading into the NLCS. I'm curious, Daniel, what you think about that.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I've been on this show all year preaching that they should go based on matchups. There shouldn't be set roles, especially for the 9th inning and Kenley. And, it's been a bumpy road to get to this point, but I feel like we could be at the point where there's no specific roles for literally anyone in the bullpen. Yeah. We could see anyone at any time, which, as you also mentioned, that's good because the Braves have no clue what to expect. So I think we've seen good things out of the Dodger bullpen so far, and we haven't even seen everybody, which is good as well because they're coming in well rested. So I think the bullpen's in a good spot, just depending on how they use Kenley.
Yeah. I mean, Matt, you haven't been on with us a ton. How are you feeling about the back end? Is there a guy of that group that you like more than another?
I think I would lean a little bit towards Trinan and Gratterall. And obviously, if for whatever reason you're going to face a run of left-handed batters and Victor Gonzalez, I mean, he's been absolutely impressive in his rookie season, and obviously against the Braves with Freddie Freeman. You imagine that Victor Gonzalez is going to play kind of a significant role. I think you guys kind of hit the nail on the head. For me, if they go to Janssen in the 9th inning, I pretty much would just make sure that a reliever is ready to start as soon as somebody gets on base, you have, your second option warming up, just because we've seen it with Kenley too many times this year where, he'll let a run or two across and maybe another run or two gets on base. And, in the postseason, you can't afford that anymore. And we saw, Joe Kelly bailed them out last time. Obviously, he walked a couple guys first, and that got a little nerve-wracking. But, I'm not in the camp that absolutely not. Kenley can never pitch the 9th inning because I think he's shown that, he does have it every now and then.
Some nights, yeah.
But I mean, you can't play that crapshoot right now.
Yeah, and I mean, especially like with the new 3-batter rule that's been instituted, it's not like Janssen can go in. Like once he's in the 9th, he has to pitch to at least 3 batters in a 1-run game. That's problematic. And I'll just throw out, I mean, I think Jake Mcgee is a guy that's super fascinating. Like from a sabermetric point of view, Jake McGee's been the Dodgers' best reliever. He misses bats the most. He strikes out the most. He is limiting hard contact. I mean, again, sort of baseball savant, kind of StatCast type stuff, loves Jake McGee, and yet we never even saw him. So I'll be curious to see, is that a weapon the Dodgers were trying to hide? Or is that a weapon that they just don't believe in as much as Gratterall, who doesn't miss a ton of bats, and Treinen, who doesn't miss a ton of bats? So it will be interesting, but I think you make some good points. Mostly right-handed lineup. We'll get into that for the Braves, but of course their best hitter, Freddie Freeman, is a lefty. So it will be interesting to see how all that shakes out. So for me, that's the biggest observation. Anything else you would add to that as far as the closer, the back end of the bullpen? Okay.
I mean, there's just so many question marks as far as who they trust and who they don't.
Yeah.
Like Jake McGee's a perfect example. I thought he was great all season, and then 5 postseason games deep, we haven't seen him yet. So I think this series, a lot of those question marks will be sorted out because kind of everyone's going to have to pitch, especially if the series goes long. So I think it's a good thing that they're coming in rested just because of how much they could potentially have to throw. But I think there's still some question marks that we're going to see sorted out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Matt, what's your observation so far? 5 games into the postseason, what have you seen from the Dodgers?
So for me, it was the lineup still, basically being able to produce and push runs across, even without Max Muncy really finding his swing. Cody Bellinger did a little bit, but generally speaking, I think you could, all season long, he hasn't hit his stride. Even Justin Turner, he's one of the better NLDS hitters in MLB history. And you look at his stats, and it was relatively quiet. Now, layered within that are productive outs, the sacrifice fly, the moving runners over, and that kind of ties into my observation is I feel like this lineup is excelling in doing that, whereas, in October last year and the year before that and, 2-3 years before that, that hasn't always been the case.
Yeah. No, I mean, I hear you. It is fascinating, and Daniel and I have spoken a little bit about the ballpark, sort of keying in on that, and it seemed like it took the Dodgers a little bit, one game to get used to it, but I will say, I'm encouraged by the same thing, just their ability to get hits and not the long ball. I mean, even extra base hits have been limited. It's a lot of just singles and moving guys over. We saw him steal bases for what seems like the first time all year, a couple different times. So I definitely would say, as weird as it is, because I don't feel like the offense is clicking fully, and yet I'm still encouraged because I just feel like the home runs and that kind of thing, it's just going to come. But I couldn't say with confidence that just the ability to get singles and clutch hits and move runners along, that I wasn't confident would necessarily come.
Yeah. I think this Dodger lineup is the best we've seen out of this run of division titles. Obviously, adding Mookie to the top is huge. He's the table setter. But also the addition of the universal DH, it just adds another quality hitter to the lineup. So now we're looking at a guy like Chris Taylor batting 9th, Jock batting 8th, or if Austin Barnes in there, who's been awesome too, he's batting 9th. So there's really just no holes in this lineup. And like Matt said, I think this year more than ever in the postseason, we see them getting the little things done, moving runners over, getting the sac fly when they need it. They're not striking out as much, which I think is huge. And I do think the ballpark has something to do with that because maybe they're not focused on hitting home runs as much just because of how big the ballpark plays. So I think that'll be an advantage moving forward because they've played there, obviously, so they know what to go and expecting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Daniel, what's your observation? I mean, we've talked about the hitting. We've talked about the back end of the bullpen. What stood out to you so far from the Dodgers?
Yeah, I'm going to the starting rotation. They've only played 5 games, and 4 of them have been started by either Walker Bueller or Clayton Kershaw. So we still don't really, kind of similar to the bullpen, there's a lot of question marks in the starting rotation. Yeah. Again, they announced today that Bueller's pitching game 1 and Kershaw's going game 2, which there's no surprise there. But then after that, we kind of have no clue what to expect. In the wild card series, we saw Julio throw three innings out of the bullpen in game 1. So he probably wouldn't have started game 3 if that went 3 games. And then in the NLDS, we saw Dustin May out of the bullpen in game 1 and then starting again as an opener in game 3 with Julio as the long man. So I think in a 7-game series, they can't really get cute like that because you're going to probably need all 5 of your starters. If the series goes long, of course, you're going to need all those guys to give you some length. So I think we'll probably see them take a bit more of a conventional approach with the starting rotation this series. But I do also think we could maybe see May out of the bullpen again in Game 1, and then he's pegged as a Game 5 starter, or that with Julio. So I think it'll be interesting, kind of similar to the bullpen. The Braves have no clue what to expect either, which I think is good. Yeah. I think we've seen a little more gamesmanship from the Dodgers this year compared to years past with their rotation. Usually they just announce games 1 through 3 or whatever, but they're not doing that this year. So I think that's good. I personally have trust in all 5 of our starters, so I hope they just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let them all start the game. Let them go, as deep as they can. Yeah. We'll see if they actually do that, though.
Yeah, and we're going to get a little later into some of those predictions and how we all feel. But, Matt, I'll ask this to you. How have you felt about Walker Bueller and Clayton Kershaw thus far?
Mixed bag, I guess, and it really is only because of Walker's blister. They've said heading into both of his postseason starts that it's not really an issue, and I think they do believe that, but we have seen, and the Dodgers have seen, that the blister could flare up at any given moment.
Yeah.
And, when obviously Walker, he struggled a little bit against the Padres, he did minimize damage by getting the 2 strikeouts, and that was key. And so I trust him in a postseason game. It's not a matter of, am I concerned that maybe Walker is just not going to pitch well because he's got nerves or whatever the case may be. It's more of, how long can he go with the blister? And so, frankly, going into both of his starts, I felt he can give them 4 innings, then that's a win.
Yeah. Yeah, I think length is the question for me, especially in a 7-game series, is what kind of length can you get from Game 1? Again, we'll talk about this a little later, but what is his availability? Can he just pitch on normal rest? Can he pitch on less rest? Does he need some extra rest as he's been getting because of the postseason schedule? So I'll be curious to see that. But, Daniel, I'm curious from you. Any concerns about Kershaw? He was so great in the first one. He was good, gets the win. It was one of those classic Kershaws that if the offense doesn't score, the headline is Kershaw loses in the playoffs and the Dodgers suck. 6 innings, 3 earned, 2 home runs in the 6th. I mean, it felt like we've seen that story. But the offense produced, and so it goes down as a win. But, any concerns about Kershaw in particular that you have heading into this series?
No, I thought Kershaw looked good in that start. Obviously, the back-to-back homers weren't ideal, but the first pitch to Machado was a good pitch. It was down and in, and credit to Manny. He just took a good swing on it. And then to Hosmer, he just left a 1-2 fastball or whatever it was kind of down the middle, and Hosmer did what he should with it. So obviously you want to cut down on mistakes, but I think in this ballpark, it's kind of good for him as far as how big it plays, just because I feel like with him in the postseason, whenever he has made mistakes, they've made him pay for it. Yeah. And maybe in this bigger ballpark, maybe that won't be the case. The Braves have tremendous power, so it's not like they can't hit it out or anything. But I liked what I saw out of Kershaw. He was cruising for most of that start, and if he could just give them 6 innings this is the best bullpen that's probably ever been behind him in the postseason. Yeah. So I don't think he doesn't have to, go above and beyond the way he's kind of been forced to in past postseasons. So if he could give us 6 innings, 3 runs, that's good enough as far as I'm concerned. On most nights.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was Smoltz who said, hey, Kershaw gets beaten in the postseason by home runs because the alternative is nobody's stringing together 4 or 5 hits against Kershaw. Yeah. If like you said, now he didn't keep him in the ballpark, even in this park, so that's slightly concerning. But as you point, the Machado home run was on a great pitch. It was out below the zone. The Hosmer pitch was a bad one. But as long as he can keep him in the park, I don't see anything in Kershaw's history, like recent history, this season, regular and postseason, that tells me they're going to be able to string together 4 or 5 hits. And like you said, if he does give up 2 or 3 hits in the 6th inning, they could go to a bullpen that you're pretty confident can get you some outs. So definitely something we'll talk about here in a little bit. But let's shift our attention from the NLDS to the NLCS. As we've said a couple times before in previous shows, it's fascinating this year because from this point forward, the Dodgers, well, I guess in this round, the Dodgers are playing somebody they haven't played at all this season. Of course, they played the Braves previous seasons. They've seen Freddie Freeman, they've seen Acuna, but this year there's nothing to compare them to, and because their pitching staff is what it is, that's an interesting thing. But let me give you just a quick rundown of the Braves as a team. On offense, we're basically looking at a clone of the Padres. It's like a mirror image. If you look up any offensive stat, the Dodgers, Padres, and Braves are going to be first, second, and third. I saw this stat. The Dodgers and Braves were first and second in runs scored, home runs, slugging percentage, OPS, and ISO. So, I mean, they're the best. The Padres are mixed in there. And there's familiar names like the Padres. The Padres were a duo of Tatis and Machado. The Braves, Acuna and Freeman. They've also got Marcell Ozuna, who is statistically better than Acuna by a long shot this year. And postseason heroes have been guys we'll talk about in a little bit, Dansby Swanson and Travis d'Arnaud. So something to keep an eye on. But the pitching staff is actually a completely different story. Again, like the Padres, a massive question mark. Regular season, the Braves had the third worst ERA among starting pitching in all of baseball. They had the third worst strikeouts per nine, the third worst walks per nine. But their bullpen was good. Fourth best ERA in the bullpen. And yet in the postseason, everything kind of clicked. And I put in here, like, take this with a grain of salt. We're talking about the Marlins offense and the Reds offense. But in 5 games, the Braves have allowed 5 runs, all of which came in 1 game. So they've got 4 shutouts, and they've scored 24 runs themselves. The star has been Ian Anderson, 11 2/3 pitched, 8 base runners, 17 strikeouts. The bullpen, 20 1/3 innings so far, 1 run, 26 strikeouts, allowing just 14 base runners. So they've been really, really good. On the offensive side, it's Swanson and d'Arnaud. Dodger legend Travis d'Arnaud I'll include in there, but both have 2 home runs, 12 RBIs between them. d'Arnaud has an OPS of 1.342. Acuna has been pretty average. Freddie Freeman has struggled, though. 3 for 18 in the playoffs, no extra base hits. d'Arnaud is the only player on the roster hitting above 275 in the postseason. So some interesting things to keep an eye on there, which brings me to the question that I want to ask to you guys is, how do we feel about this matchup? And I'll frame it up with a couple of mailbag questions that we got that I think will give us some directions we can head. The first is from Sean Alarid on Twitter. He says, how does the Dodgers pitching match up with the Braves lineup? And then our friend Desiree Angel over at Pantone 294 says, the Dodgers and Braves have similar pitching stats. Who do you think will come out on top or shine during this series? Are there any matchups? So, Daniel, I'll turn to you first. When you think about the Braves and the Dodgers as far as a matchup between, how do you feel about this matchup?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a good matchup. In my opinion, I know everyone loved the Padres this year, but I always viewed the Braves as the second best team in the National League. That's been the case for almost 3 years now. They have a lot of young talent and are kind of trending up the same way the Dodgers have. So I think it's a good matchup. I'll answer that question about the Dodgers pitching staff against the Braves lineup, because to me that's the matchup that could decide the series. The Braves lineup is just similar to the Dodgers. Like you said, it's stacked, and they have the superstars at the top and the guys they weren't necessarily expecting to contribute in the middle, like d'Arnaud and Swanson. They've been doing great. So I think if the Dodgers pitching staff could slow down that lineup, I think that's the key to the series. The Braves lineup, I don't know what the exact stat is. I don't know if it's most home runs or highest batting average, but they've absolutely crushed fastballs this year. So I think we're going to see a lot of off-speed pitches from the Dodgers pitching staff, and that kind of plays in well for a lot of the guys the Dodgers have. We know Kershaw loves to throw that slider and his curves, so he's had success against the Braves in the past. I remember in the NLDS in 2018, I think he went like 7 shutout innings or whatever it was, and Ryu had a similar outing because he throws the off speed as well. So I think if the Dodgers pitching staff could slow down that lineup, then that's the key to the series for me.
Yeah, and Matt, I'll flip it to you. I mean, what's interesting to me is how similar this team is to the one we just played. I mean, almost player to player, you can look for a comp between the Padres and the Braves. They are built the same. They are offensively very similar, pitching-wise very similar. And so we're coming off a series where the Dodgers hold the Padres to just 9 runs in 3 games. Is there anything, when you look up this matchup between Dodgers pitching and Braves lineup, I mean, is there any reason to believe that this time against the Braves, things are going to go dramatically differently than they did against the Padres the last few games?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, if you look at how the Dodgers did against the Padres, Tatis and Machado, I think combined had 4 hits in the series. And the Dodgers definitely, you kind of ran through the Braves lineup. The Dodgers don't have any shortage of right-handed pitchers, which should work in their favor, even though, Daniel brought up the Braves do hit velocity pretty well. It's going to kind of be strength for strength. And, Tony Gonzalez, he can throw, close to triple digits, but he also has his split changeup that is just a devastating pitch to kind of work off of his fastball. Dustin May, some of his breaking stuff, needs to be refined still, but there isn't that much familiarity between him and the Braves. I know we faced them a little bit last year. I think he's a better pitcher than he was last season. And typically when, a pitcher and batter kind of seeing each other for the first time, the pitcher will, I think, have the advantage, a slight advantage, at least the first couple times around. So that could end up helping the Dodgers. And also, one thing, and we can kind of get into this later, a lot has been made of, not having home field advantage. And that's true, obviously. But I think the Dodgers do, in the sense that they've played outside of, the wild card series. They've already been at Globe Life Field. Whereas the Braves are coming from Minute Maid Park, and, we're all too familiar with how that plays.
I mean, absolutely. Now, Daniel, I'm curious, that stat about fastballs, and maybe you don't know the answer. The Dodgers rely a lot on two-seam fastballs. So I'm curious if that will actually be an advantage because, most teams are beginning to rely way more on the four-seam fastball, especially in the bullpen. The Dodgers are kind of going the opposite direction and going more with sinker balls, which is what you see out of Dustin May and guys like Blake Trinan. So, I mean, I don't know much, but I wonder if that's kind of could play in the advantage of the Dodgers.
Yeah, I definitely think that makes a difference. That's a fair point. The Dodgers this year had like the highest rate in the league of sinkers thrown, which is kind of a strategy that not too many teams have been embracing. I don't know if the Dodgers did that on purpose or if it just kind of worked out that way with the guys they got. But yeah, Dustin May's got the sinker, Gratterall has it, Trinan has it. So we see a lot of the guys throwing sinkers, which is not the same pitch as just fastballs. So I think that'll be a change. I'm not exactly sure how many Marlins or Reds pitchers threw sinkers, so I don't know if it'll be too much different, but it's definitely a different look for them.
Yeah, and I'll throw this in there as well. The Braves hit righties better than lefties. They're about league average against left-handed pitching for the most part, second in the league when it comes to batting average against right-handed. I mentioned this, mostly right-handed bats. Freddie Freeman's a lefty. Ozzie Albies is a switch hitter. Aside from that, a lot of their best hitters are righties. So definitely will be something to watch. I mean, most teams typically hit righties better than lefties. They're not used to seeing as many lefties. And yet there is a pretty big gap as far as relative to the rest of the league. So the Dodgers have plenty of lefties. I mean, you'll see Kershaw for sure. Rios will probably play a big role in this series. And then you've got some left-handed arms like Jake Mcgee and Adam Kolarek in the bullpen as well, which will be something to keep an eye on. Now, to flip to Desiree's question, the Braves and the Dodgers pitching staffs, I think this is where the massive difference is going to be. And it's something we've talked about in that the Braves pitching has been really, really good this postseason, but they've only had to play 5 games, and they've been able to do like the Dodgers did. They got 4 starts from Max Fried. I don't know if it's Fried or Fried, but we'll go with Fried. Fried, okay. Max Fried and Ian Anderson. But the question for them is, who's the 4th starter or even the 5th starter? In the NLDS, they were going to go with either Bryce Wilson or Huascar Ynoa. Wilson made 2 starts in the regular season pretty successfully. Ynoa made 5 and had an ERA of 8.53. So I think that's where the difference is. Up until this point in a 3-game series, sure, their stats look the same. But if this series goes 5, 6, or 7, the Braves are going to have to pick somebody other than these 2 guys they've thrown out, which, by the way, Fried was the one who gave up all of the runs, 4 of the runs that the Braves have given up. So even he hasn't been super great so far. So I think, to me, we could say, hey, their stats have been okay, and this Braves pitching staff is much different than it was in the regular season. But I think this is one of those things that the sample size gets larger and larger. You're going to start to see a massive difference between the Dodgers pitching and the Braves. And I'm just talking starters. I think the Braves bullpen is actually probably as deep as any other bullpen compared to the Dodgers. They could probably are the only ones who have a 7th, 8th, or 9th reliever that they don't absolutely hate throwing out there in a game of value. So I think that is something to watch. But in a 7-game series, they're going to have to find length somewhere. And even their best pitcher has 11 1/3 innings in 2 starts. So it's not even like they're getting length out of the guys that they've had to rely on so far. Let's shift to the question that we've kind of been dancing around the whole time, which is the Dodger rotation. And again, this is another thing that came up a couple times in questions that we received. T. Mattern asked about Bueller pitching before Kershaw in San Diego. He asked, because he's pitching better and longer and both are rested, might it make more sense to put Kershaw ahead of Bueller in game 1? Again, Dave Roberts has already answered that today in a press conference just before we recorded, that Bueller is going in game 1 and Kershaw in game 2. And then again on Twitter, on Instagram, FK7Tubbs asked, will Dustin May or Julio Urias start game 3? Again, Roberts says everybody other than Kershaw and Bueller is available in game 1 and game 2, and that they haven't made a decision on game 3. So let's start with this. And Matt, I'll come to you first on this question. The decision to start Bueller ahead of Kershaw. Any concerns, any issues, any debate there, or is that pretty simple to you?
No, I think it's straightforward to me. Going into the postseason, I thought maybe they would have given Kershaw the game 1 start just because he had pitched more than Bueller and had pitched a little bit better than him this season. Once they decided not to, I mean, it's 1A and 1B at the end of the day. And I think, frankly, a lot of it has to do with Bueller's blister and how they might have to cover. They don't know what they're going to get out of him. So if you only get 3 or 4 innings, you obviously will have to rely on your bullpen more heavily than you would want to, perhaps under normal circumstances, obviously. And then if you can follow that the next night with pretty much being able to bank on at least 6 innings from Kershaw, it gets you back on track. Whereas if you go with Kershaw in game 1, sure, your bullpen is rested for game 2, but if Bueller goes short, then maybe you're looking at a situation where your bullpen is taxed in games 2, maybe even game 3, because, they haven't necessarily given any of the other 3 starters a long leash anyway. So I think that kind of strategy is a significant factor here. And frankly, I don't know what to expect with the rotation after the first 2 games. I definitely think we're going to see one of Dustin, Julio, and Tony in probably game 1, obviously, and then they'll kind of piece it together after that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. Something I hadn't really thought of is that leaving Kershaw in game 2 allows your bullpen to get a break between game 1 and game 3 as far as taxing. Now, obviously, this is all hopeful. There's no guarantee that Kershaw is going to give you 6 really good innings, but if you're going to bet on one guy giving you 6 really good innings, I think it is Kershaw. And so that's a great point. Daniel, for you, I mean, do you look at it as is Bueller game 6's starter and Kershaw game 7's starter? Is there any, if we get that far, is there any change to that? I mean, the question for me as far as the front end is, if you needed Bueller on short rest, could you get him on short rest? If game 5 was a must win, if you're down 3-1, could he come back and pitch game 5? I think we'd feel fine with Kershaw in game 6 and maybe even Gonzalez in game 7 if he's your game 3 guy. But I mean, how do you feel about Bueller on short rest, or is he game 6 and Kershaw game 7?
Yeah, the short rest question's an interesting one. They're going to be playing 7 games in 7 days, but if you want to start going guys on short rest, then everyone else in the rotation kind of has to follow. Yeah. Like if you move Bueller up to game 5, that means Kershaw has to move up to game 6, and then whoever throws game 3 is pitching on short rest in game 7. And I don't think the Dodgers want to do that. I think they'd probably be comfortable with Bueller and Kershaw in short rest. And maybe if they're, up in a series or down in a series to the point where they feel it's necessary, then they'll do it. But they're going to need all their guys fresh for the World Series as well if they advance. Like, this isn't the last series. So I don't think they're that desperate that they're going to start moving everyone up yet, especially when you got 5 guys who are all really good starters and capable of giving you length. So like Matt said, I'm not exactly sure what to expect after Bueller and Kershaw in games 1 and 2, but I do know that, the choices are strong ones. And I think whoever, pitches out of the bullpen in game 5, whether it's May or Julio, I think then they become the game 5 starter maybe. So I think maybe after game 1, we'll get a little bit more clarity of who's going in game 3 and 4. But with these guys, we really never know.
Yeah, I mean, there is this confusion around game 3, although I would say, I mean, isn't it pretty clear that Gonzalez is going to be the guy in game 3? The Dodgers clearly saved him in the NLDS if they needed him for game 4. Now, when I say game 3, let me rephrase that. Isn't it clear that if the Dodgers' third choice of a guy who's going to start and pitch serious innings seems to be Gonzalez, they never used him as a reliever. Maybe that was situational. To me, it seemed intentional. Now, obviously, they ended up going bullpen game in game 3, which was a little bit confusing to me. We talked about that on our post-game show, but I guess to me, it seems like Gonzalez would be your game 3 guy, but maybe does the NLDS make you question that? I mean, Matt, what do you think? Is Gonzalez the game 3 guy in your, if you were forced to bet on it, would you bet bullpen game or Tony Gonzalez for game 3?
Well, I would bet bullpen game just because when you think the Dodgers are going to zig, they zag. Now, if I were making the decisions, I would say absolutely Tony Gonzalez should be your game 3 starter. I felt that way kind of before the postseason started. And I was fully expecting him to start game 3 against the Padres. Yeah. So, to me, I think that, you use Dustin and Julio, one of the two out of the bullpen in game 1, start Gonzalez in game 3, and then come back with one of the other two in game 4, and then figure it out, kind of let it unfold after that. But, I don't know. I mean, they're obviously comfortable going with a bullpen game. And I can understand that to a certain extent. But like Daniel just said, you have to be careful because as much as you don't want to look ahead and take for granted that you're going to advance, the reality is if you win this, you are advancing to another series where you have to possibly play 7 more games.
Yeah. And there is rest, at least in the World Series. There are some days off, so that changes things a little bit. But Daniel, what about you? I mean, I'll phrase it the way Matt phrased it. Your prediction and what you would do as far as game 3.
Yeah, I mean, I thought Gonzalez would have been the guy in game 3 in the NLDS, so that's why I'm also hesitant to say, yeah, for sure, he's the game 3 guy. Gun to my head, I think he's going to be the game 4 guy, which was the plan in the NLDS if they would have lost the game. So I think they're going to stick with that, and I think they'll go with Julio in game 3, either as a starter or as the same as we just saw as like the bulk guy with an opener, which I wouldn't do, but I guess makes a little sense because he's struggled in the first inning this season, and in the postseason, his 2 appearances have both been out of the bullpen, and he came in right away looking great from his very. Maybe they go with an opener and then go to him for 5 innings, which you could basically consider that a start because he's still the guy giving a bulk of the innings. He's just not pitching the first. I mean, I don't know for sure whether it's Julio game 3, Gonzalez game 4, May game 5, but it'll be in some sort of order for those guys.
Yeah, it's fair. It does. I mean, it does seem like that's the way they're setting it up, right? Is Bueller and Kershaw games 1 and 2, 6 and 7 would be on normal rest for both of those guys. 3, 4, and 5, you're going to get some combination of Gonzalez, Urias, and May probably pitching. I mean, if you said who's going to pitch the most innings for the Dodgers in 3, 4, and 5, those 3 names are probably at the top of the list. In what order, chronologically or numerically, who knows? But definitely something interesting. And again, the Dodgers, they have the ability. I mean, in years past, they've had Hyunjin Ryu or they've had Kenta Maeda or a guy that you just pencil in, and it's like the Dodgers could try and play coy, but everybody would know. This year, they genuinely can keep it a mystery because nobody knows. And the Braves are going to be able to do the same thing, and we'll see where it goes. So let's flip from the pitching. Go ahead.
Real quick, I want to add something that I actually just thought of. I'm pretty sure Gonzalez throwing a simulated game today, which is Saturday. So then normal rest for him after today's simulated game, which I think they plan to stretch him out. Normal rest would be Thursday, which would that would put him in line to pitch game 4.
Got it. So there you go.
Daniel cracked the code.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember right before we recorded, I saw that tweet that he was throwing today.
and did they say simulated start or bullpen or?
I think they said like
simulated
4
game.
or 5 innings. I don't think they said starting or relieving, but I think they said they wanted to stretch him out a little bit.
There you go. Well, and I'm sure, that leads perfectly into the next question, which is the roster changes, because I'm sure that performance will be used to make some decisions as far as the roster goes. So a couple more mailbag questions we had. 22 Husky on Instagram asked, are rosters expanded for the NLCS? The answer to that one is no. It's this no and yes and no. They are as expanded as they have already been for the playoffs. So there's not more players than the NLDS. The next question we got, does anyone else feel like Kenley should be left off of the NLCS roster? I think the answer there is a clear no. None of us necessarily love the idea of him being the closer, but I don't think any of us are arguing that he's not still one of the 7 or 8 best relief pitchers the Dodgers have. And so that leads to roster changes. There's 2 kind of names that I think are floating around on the outside, guys who weren't on the NLDS roster that could float their way in. And we'll start with the easier, or I should say the more obvious of those 2 names. And Matt, I'm going to come to you because I know Dave Roberts touched on this a little bit. But Edwin Rios, what did you hear? Where is he at health-wise? Because I think the first question is he healthy? And then the second question is, if he is healthy, does he get a spot back on the roster? So let's start with the health. Is Edwin Rios, is the sense that you get, is he healthy? Do the Dodgers know as far as the NLCS goes?
So it didn't seem like they fully know yet. Dave Roberts said that he's improving every single day, and on Friday, Rios took swings and ran to about 75%. They're going to have another workout Saturday that I imagine he'll also be part of, kind of taking BP. Maybe he's not in the sim game, but probably taking more swings. I think they have the same plan for Sunday. Rosters then would be due Monday morning. If I had to guess, I think he does get back onto the roster. He seems to at least be trending in that direction. And Gavin Lux, I mean, it was kind of just, more of the regular season. He didn't really show anything that would warrant keeping him still on it. And also another change that I personally would make that I don't know, Dave Roberts didn't hint at it anything, is I would bring Keibert Ruiz back as your third catcher over Terrence Gore. And some of it is just, with me, I know that kind of speed, pinch runner role has played a pivotal part for some teams. I haven't really seen the Dodgers ever use it enough or benefit to where it makes sense for me personally.
Yeah.
And I think now at this point, you obviously have Will Smith, who is tearing the cover off the ball. As Daniel mentioned earlier in the show, Austin Barnes is also starting to swing the bat well. So why not, just cover yourself with a third catcher to maybe have both of those guys in the lineup a few more times than maybe you were initially expecting. So those are the two roster changes I would make. Dave Roberts also hinted at possible changes in the bullpen. He said they're kind of thinking through some things and matchups. And so to me, looking at kind of who was left off, that screams Alex Wood, but also considering he struggled and was injured this year, I don't know if that would make sense. But, I guess we'll see.
Considering how good he is, though, it makes me wonder. Well, let's stay hitting-wise, Daniel, and I'll come to you. Edwin Rios, Keibert Ruiz, Gavin Lux, Matt Beatty, Terrence Gore. Those 5 guys, presumably 2 roster spots. If Rios is healthy, what do you do with those 5 guys in those 2 spots?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if Rios is healthy, to me, he's on the roster. This is a guy that the very first game of this postseason, he was in the lineup as the DH. He had a great year. Obviously, we know how much power he has. So I think if he's healthy, he's at least on the roster. Maybe not in the starting lineup or anything, but he's probably your best bat off the bench just in a pinch hitting type situation. If they bring in like a righty reliever or whatever. So I think if Rios is healthy, he's on the roster. And I also agree with Matt. I would carry the third catcher just because you never know what's going to happen in these games. And we've seen specifically when Kershaw's starting, we know Barnes is going to be catching him and Smith is DHing.
Yeah.
And who knows, maybe if Barnes continues to swing the bat as well as he have, maybe he earns himself even more starts in other games. We know he handles a pitching staff better than Will Smith. We know he's a better framer than Will Smith. So, maybe if he's going to hit the way he did in the NLDS, then I don't see why not, at least let him earn that spot to be a catcher and Will Smith as the DH, especially if guys like Jock and Kike are continuing to not hit. So I would go with Ruiz over Lux. Just never really proved to be worthy of a roster spot. We saw in the NLDS there was no real role for him to contribute. Still very high on him long term, obviously, but I just don't think this is the year for him. Never really was. It didn't get off to the best start, and he never really found his way. So I don't think Lux brings much to the table. And like Matt said, there's really not too many pinch running situations for Terrence Gore. It's not like they're going to be taking someone like Mookie or Seager or Cody out of the game for a pinch runner. So I would rather have the extra bat in Rios if he's healthy, and then if he's not healthy, then Matt Beatty gets that spot for me.
Now, one interesting thing is, and maybe it's reading too much, I mean, Lux was the guy who got a random garbage time pinch hit opportunity in the NLDS Game 3 against the Padres. So I'm trying to figure out, do you read into that? And also, as far as him, Beatty, and Gore, Lux actually does provide speed. So I wonder if those 3, if Lux is actually the guy who gets the spot, because he can kind of fill the Terrence Gore role to some degree as speed if you need it. We've talked in the past about how the Dodgers actually don't have much speed at all on the bench, aside from Terrence Gore. And a guy like Kike Hernandez obviously has some speed, but he's been a defensive replacement. So I wonder if Lux is the guy of those three who keeps his spot with someone like Ruiz and someone like Rios getting back into the group. So, but overall, I mean, I was pro Keibert Ruiz sticking around on the roster to begin with. You know, I do think Austin Barnes there's actually a bit of a gap defensively between him and Will Smith, so I would not be opposed to him catching more. Of course, Jock Peterson hitting better is a plus. He hit pretty well in the last round, so if he can turn it around, that makes the DH decisions a little more complicated, probably hurts Rios a little bit as far as opportunities. But I think we're all generally on the same page that Gore and Beatty would be coming off in exchange for Keibert Ruiz and Edwin Rios, assuming he's healthy. And even if he's 90%, I mean, it's 7 games in 7 days. The odds you're going to want Rios in game 1. You know, like even if he's 90% healthy, but he can be 100% healthy by game 3, I probably would still take Rios, all things considered. But let's talk about the pitching, because Alex Wood, prior to Robert saying anything about the bullpen, is actually a name I thought of. Not because I like Alex Wood, not because I think he should be anywhere near a discussion about a roster, but 7 games in 7 days. Do the Dodgers want a guy like Wood who can go out and eat innings? And I'm talking about a blowout scenario. Imagine it's game 3 and one of the two teams gets up, 8-1 or something like that. Do you want a guy like Alex Wood who can go out there and sort of give you garbage time duty and eat up 4 innings so you don't destroy your bullpen? I mean, that's the only possible explanation. The flip side is I love Dylan Floro, and he's clearly last on the pecking order as far as the bullpen goes. So that's where it hurts me. But that's my thought process. I don't like the decision, but that's what I could see. I mean, Daniel, is there anything in there for you? Like, do you need the guy that can eat innings, or do you hate it?
I mean, it's fair. I mean, they're potentially playing 7 games in 7 days, which is a lot. If they do play 7 games, chances are there's going to be at least one blowout mixed in there. But at the end of the day, it's still Alex Wood for me. I don't think he gives you anything as far as in a close game. Like, I don't see a scenario where you go to him in a close game, whereas I actually would kind of trust Dylan Floro in a close game. Maybe he wouldn't be able to give you the length that Alex Wood will give you, but also it's not like Wood's been stretched out as a starter all year, so he can maybe give you like 2, maybe 3 innings, but it's not like he could come in and eat the final 5 innings of a 10-1 game or something like that. So yeah. I just don't think he brings enough to the table to actually get a roster spot.
Yeah, and it is interesting if you're talking about a bullpen game. I mean, is a guy like Wood, who's a lefty, the Braves, again, are at league average against lefties compared to against righties. I mean, is he a guy like Kolarek we saw come in early? Is Wood a guy that could be an opener, or could be sort of part of a bullpen game where he comes into pitch, maybe you get sort of a favorable section of the lineup against lefties, whereas with Wood you say, hey, at least if the first inning looks good, you're not afraid to trot him out there for a second and a third. I mean, I don't think any of us are expecting it, but that's I'm just trying to be optimistically think, why is this even a discussion? And that's as close as I can get. The sense I get is that none of us are predicting Alex Wood. Well, I should say this. None of us want Alex Wood on the roster. Is that an accurate assessment? Are either of you predicting? Give me a thumbs up or a thumb down. Is Alex Wood on the postseason roster? Thumbs up or thumbs down? I'm going no. Matt's going yes. And is that the rationale being just because Robert's hinted at it, or because you think because you're thinking differently in the way I should be thinking, which is I've been wrong about every prediction I've made about the Dodgers so far, so I'm just going to do the opposite?
No, I mean, I think Robert's hinting at it, obviously, like I said, got me thinking, okay, who would be added, who kind of makes sense. And I think there is some value to what you both you guys said. Wood, Alex isn't going to give you 4 or 5 innings. Yes, he could still maybe eat 2 or 3 in a game here or there. And when a scenario where you're possibly playing 7 in a row, that comes with some benefit and value. My only question and my one reservation would be is not to add him to the bullpen and take someone out.
Yeah.
I would rather them go with a shorter bench than they have been, because I don't think Wood warrants a bullpen spot over any of the guys that they just carried for the DS.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, there's no reason the Dodgers couldn't add a bullpen arm. I mean, they've played 5 games so far, and they have multiple guys on the bench who never even, I mean, they have multiple pitchers who haven't pitched, but they also have multiple hitters who haven't hit. And a lot of guys that we've pointed out, it's like, if, you know, you're not going to take Pollock out. They have taken Pollock out for platoon stuff. But, I mean, like, you've taken Pollock out, I guess, to get Kike in defensively. But it's not like it's not like you have Jock in the starting lineup where it's like, well, as soon as a lefty comes in, we need to take him out. There's a lot of these guys that are set in stone. Will Smith, if he's your DH, or Austin Barnes, or whoever, like guys that just are hitting both ways. So definitely that will be, I think, if there's intrigue as far as in the next couple of days, I think that's probably it. So.
And don't forget, Mookie Betts can play second base if things get really crazy.
Oh, no.
Well, and I learned that Matt Beatty is the emergency catcher. He apparently was a catcher in college, I believe they said. So he hasn't caught a single inning since, but he was the third catcher in an emergency, which is a downgrade from Puig as emergency catcher as far as I'm concerned. But still, that was a fun fact. So let's rapid fire hit a couple of mailbag questions. Matt, I'll go to you with the first one. This is from Instagram, GIV83. I'm not even trying to pronounce any of these, but will Dave Roberts keep the same batting order 1 through 5? Yes or no?
Yes, I think he's pretty set on the line. Obviously, Mookie and Seager are locked in, and he likes everybody else behind them.
Daniel, any changes there? I think we all agree on 1, 2, and 3 with Turner 3rd, Muncy 4, Will Smith 5. Those two guys, or maybe I've got those backwards, but I mean, do you see those 5 as the first 5 hitters, or does Muncy get moved down?
I mean, the only change they would maybe make is they've had Muncy 4th, Will Smith 5th, and Cody 6th. Maybe they put Cody 4th and Muncy 6th. But I don't see a need to start making wholesale changes. We've kind of been begging for years to just, hey, we're in the postseason. Guys are swinging the bats well. Let's just stick with the lineup. Let's not change it every day. So I'm glad they're at least finally kind of doing that with at least the first 6 guys or whatever.
Yeah. The next question, this is from Kim.P on Instagram. Matt, I know we've got a start time for Monday. Do we have a TV? What channel the games will be on this series?
Yeah, so game 1 will be on Fox, and the rest of the series will either be on Fox or FS1. They'll make those announcements kind of as they set the start times. I know a lot of people are upset with Game 3 being on MLB Network, but rest assured you won't run into that issue this series. And if the Dodgers advance, the World Series is on Fox.
Got it. So there you go. Okay, this one I think. We'll go to the easy one here. This is IV Dog on Instagram. Daniel, when will Dave Roberts be fired? I want a date.
This is a popular question. A lot of people thought it would be after they lost to the Nationals last year. It wasn't. I honestly don't. I hate to break it to some people, but I don't think he's going to be fired at the end of this year, regardless of the outcome of the season. I know a lot of people like to criticize him, and rightfully so most of the time, but it's also a very collaborative effort in this organization. So it would be, we don't know if it's Dave Roberts making some of these decisions or the front office. So I don't think it would make sense for the front office to fire Dave Roberts for what we maybe think is a decision Dave Roberts made and maybe they made, or they made it together. So I don't think Dave Roberts is going anywhere, regardless of what happens.
Okay, here's probably the most interesting question. Lady CIO1 on Instagram asks, Matt, do you want the Dodgers and the Astros in the World Series? I assume I know that you want the Dodgers in the World Series. The question is, do you want to be playing the Astros?
Yeah, so going into the postseason, I thought it would have been funny if the Astros just didn't make the playoffs at all. They backed in with kind of this expanded format, and then they won their first round, and then they beat the A's, and now here they are in the ALCS. So at this point, yes, I do feel like, you know what, let's just get the Dodgers and the Astros on an even playing field and kind of settle that score.
Daniel?
I have to agree there. I thought I was going to be the only one to say that, but yeah, I agree with Matt.
Yeah, I want nothing to do with the Astros. I'm the type of person that imagines, like, if we were to lose to this team, how much worse is it? And if we were to lose to the Astros in the World Series, I honestly think that is like second only to losing to the San Francisco Giants in the NLCS. I mean, those are like the 2 worst case scenarios. On one hand, yes, the Astros pitching is terrible. Their offense is pretty good. Tampa Bay is actually really good. They have the best record in the American League. Their pitching's really good. So I don't want anything to do with the Astros, because if worst case scenario, we were to make the World Series and lose. I would much rather lose to the Rays than have to deal with all of the crap. Now, if you guaranteed me I was going to win, of course I would want to beat the Astros more than anybody else. This is just the weird, psychotic way my brain works, which is protect myself from the most amount of pain possible. The Astros present the most possible pain, so there's my answer on that one. One last question, and I'll take this one. Dodgers tend to hit righties better than lefties. Who are the best lefties the Dodgers might see from Atlanta? Do they have any lefty starters we should worry about? This was from Carlos De Castro on Twitter. I did a little research for you. The Dodgers are 13th in batting average against lefties in this regular season, 7th against righties, so not a massive difference like you see on the Braves. Of the Braves' 3 starters, 1 is a lefty. That's Max Fried. The other 2 guys are both righties. As far as bullpen arms, Will Smith, old friend Will Smith, is a lefty out of the pen. He's been really good. He's seen the most action of any Braves reliever thus far. Tyler Matzik was the best reliever during the regular season, 2.79 ERA, tons of strikeouts, another lefty. AJ Minter is another lefty who was really good. Some other guys, Chris Martin is another one of their best pitchers. And then their closer, another familiar name, Mark Melancon. Couldn't cut it with the Giants. He came back to the Braves where he's been good, and he's been their closer all season. He's got their only save in the postseason, 11 on the regular year. So as I said, they do have some good lefties. I do think this is probably, besides the Dodgers, the deepest bullpen in the National League for sure. Maybe Major League Baseball. It looks like when you look down the list, 8 or 9 guys that they trust. So that'll do it for the mailbag. We appreciate those questions. As always, you can send those to us on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or comment on the YouTube video and let us know there. But let's close it out quickly with what we've done at every round. The Dodgers win if ... The Dodgers lose if ... And then we'll get to some predictions. So, Daniel, I'll start with you. The Dodgers win this series if what, or they lose this series if what?
I feel like my answer for every round as far as when the series goes has been if their lineup could, work counts and get into the bullpen early. And I still think that's the case this series, but I'm going to go a different direction. I'm going to go if the Dodgers, their starters could give them length. And if they could slow down this Braves lineup, I think we're in a good spot. So I think the key to this series is our pitching staff slowing down their bats. So I'll go there for wins, and I'm sticking right there for if the Dodgers lose this series, it's because their starters don't give them length. The Braves score some early runs and play with a lead. So yeah, to me, it all comes down to this Dodgers pitching staff.
Okay, Matt, what about you? What's kind of the key for you to the Dodgers winning, or the thing that could go wrong and cause them to lose?
So I think the Dodgers win if they continue kind of with their situational hitting that we touched on earlier, kind of just sustaining that and maybe even improving. Whereas, instead of a sac fly, maybe you get a base hit so that you still kind of have another runner on base or whatever the case might be. They lose the series if the bullpen just can't withstand at least playing. You're looking, no matter what, you're going to be playing 4 games in 4 days. And yeah. I don't think either team is going to sweep. So we're probably looking at least 5 or 6 games in 6 days. So if the bullpen can't kind of carry its weight, which they have all year, it'll be trouble for the Dodgers.
To me, the key to the whole series, and this is game 1. And the reason I say that is because I think Walker Bueller and the Braves' Ian Anderson are the 2 most important people to me in this series. Ian Anderson's been dominant for the Braves, I think, and he's far and away the best pitcher the Braves have. If the Dodgers can get to Anderson in game 1, keep him to 3 or 4 innings, get 3 or 4 runs, if not more, against him, I think that sets them up for success if they can get to the bullpen, etc. Same with Bueller. If Bueller can inch closer and closer to the Walker Bueller we know, I think the Dodgers win this series handily, because that means they're going to get 1, if not 2 starts again with him, and it's going to set, again, the bullpen up, everybody else up for games 3, 4, and 5 when you definitely need more of a bullpen. So that's kind of the positive. If they win, if they can get to Ian Anderson, and if Walker Bueller can be Walker Bueller. I think if they lose, I honestly think, as much as I love the back end of the bullpen, I think the 9th inning is going to be fascinating to watch. What happens in the 9th? Do the Dodgers find someone or a couple of guys that they can trust in those situations? It seems like they have them, but they haven't done it before. Nobody other than Kenley Janssen has really been handed the 9th inning. Gratterall got it in game 2. That was a 3-run lead, not super stressful. So I'll be fascinated. I think that's the key for me. They win if they can get to Ian Anderson. They lose if they can't figure out the back of their bullpen. Well, let's close things out with the prediction. Matt, I'll start with you. Dodgers, Braves, NLCS. What's your prediction?
Dodgers in 6.
Okay. Daniel?
I'm a little more confident. I'll go Dodgers in 5.
Well, I'm just going to go one more. Daniel's bringing his broom on game 4 because I think the Dodgers are going to sweep. I just think they get to Anderson, they beat him. I think they get to Fried and they beat him. And I think game 3 and game 4 is an absolute disaster for the Braves pitching wise. So the overly confident me is here. Dodgers in 4. Daniel's going to bring his 1920s broom back to our post-game show, and we're just going to go from there. So there you have it. Dodgers, Braves getting set. Monday night is first game 1, 5:08. Is that right? 5:08 is first pitch on Fox. So stay tuned there. And then Daniel and I will be doing live post games. Monday will for sure be here. We're trying to figure out the rest of the week. Obviously, depends on start times. But game 1 for sure, we've got a live post game. So check us out for that. As always, DodgerBlue.com is your place to go for coverage. We've got tons of stuff up there if you want to read up on the Braves, who's on their roster, who's in their lineup, more information about how they got to this point. We've got lots of good content there. Follow us on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got pre- and post-game interviews. Dave Roberts had an interview or a press conference earlier today. That'll be up there. So stay tuned for stuff like that. And then, of course, DodgerBlue.com, DodgerBlue1958 on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. We've got tons of new content, tons of new stories all the time, so check us out there. And with that, we will see you on Monday night after Game 1 of the NLCS. Thanks for joining us. Have a good one.